Welcome back. The General Industries Workers of South Africa supports the merger of state-owned energy companies to establish the South African National Petroleum Company. However, the Workers' Union underscores the necessity for thorough reforms to shape the energy sector and to address governance challenges of transparency as well as accountability. Now, for more on this conversation, we're now joined by GIWUSA President Mametlwe Sebei. Mametlwe, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this evening. So, Petro SA, Gas and Strategic Fuel Fund have now become SANPC. GIWUSA has welcomed this formation. Why is that so?
Yes, obviously there is an advantage of streamlining, operations, and in this case, it also entails really a consolidation of the state-owned energy companies, particularly in the petrochemical industries, which we think that are very important, particularly in resolving and overcoming the challenges the country is facing, particularly its working class and middle class people that are struggling with access to fuels. The prices, of petrol, of diesel, of paraffin, of gas have become unaffordable for a great majority of people, both in terms of their domestic and day-to-day use, but also in terms of just, other small commercial uses. And I think we think that this consolidation does present an opportunity, which, if placed on a correct basis, can actually help us in overcoming those problems.
Given the track record of state-owned entities in South Africa, how do you believe this will run differently to what we've already experienced?
Well, so far, there's no cause for excitement about that. In fact, you just have to look at the newly appointed board of directors, that these are people, who most of them just represent, special interest agenda, agendas, like other state-owned entities, ESCOM. It's people drawn from, fossil fuel industries, the big corporations in that industry. These are people that are part of the predatory ANC elite that has collapsed state-owned entities. I mean, you look at the newly appointed chairperson, Sipho Mkhize is his name. This is a former SCN CEO of Petro SA, who was dismissed by Petro SA. They never disclosed the reasons at the time, but there were indications that he was linked with, that deal with Cape Diving that amounted to approximately 720-something million, and it was scandalous. And now they are not explaining why they think that he now deserves to be leading this new entity. And we can go on and on, but the fact of the matter is, like many other state-owned entities, unless we make sure that the governance is made of public interest, which we would argue require a democratically elected board made up of representatives of the working class, that is the company employees, the trade union movement, community civics, and other public interests like taxi industry, climate justice movement. Only then will we ensure that this company becomes a truly public service that works in the interest of the majority of the country's people, not for the profit and the interest of the few, corporations that operate in the petrochemical supply chain, and also really serve the interests of the country in terms of ensuring an affordable and accessible fuel. And we believe the other way of doing that is ensure that we basically bring into this company, right, other monopolies in the sector. We need a renationalization of Sasol that was built, by the way, with the public funds handed to the private and profiteering interest. And to this very day, the policy of oil import is still structured in such a way that it favors them to the tune of 30 billion rand at the expense of the economy and the expense of South African people, right? So we also need nationalization of the remaining, petrochemical monopolies, Shell, Total, BP, you mentioned all of them, so that there is a state and a public ownership and monopoly over the import, supply, and distribution of the fuels, so that they are distributed in such a way that it is not profiteering, it is about affordability. Because look at the prices of diesel. Look at the price of petrol. Right? These companies are raking billions while the people are suffering and starving of basic energy and vital fuels they need.
So, I mean, you've already made mention of some of the demands that you have as GIWUSA, which is the renationalization of Sasol, and you also demand for a democratically elected board. You've made mention of the head of Petroleum, who now also sits on this board. What does this democratically elected board look like?
Look, I mean, and people tend to think that we are living in our own dreams here. You know, I always actually give an example of the sector in which I actually work. And I always say, look at universities. What set universities as state institutions apart from other public services? Why is it that public higher education, for instance, is relatively successful and has outcompeted the private education to a point where you see all these private universities and colleges are actually failing to attract students? It is partly because you have, councils, that is equivalent of boards of directors, made up in the case of universities of students, of academics, of community representatives, and of course, of the workers and so on. That's what we are saying. What we are saying is that we need the board of the state-owned entities, including the new, National Petroleum company, to be made up of the workers in that company, of the trade union movement broadly, of the community representatives, to ensure that these state-owned entities function in the interest of the public interest that these people actually should be able to represent. That these industries are actually put in the service of the people and not in the interest of the big corporations that they tend to have very corrupt relationship with. And I mean, many scandals that afflicted Petro SA that some of them I've mentioned in relation to the chairperson. But also there was, you remember, a very big scandal of the attempt to sell the 10.3 million barrels of strategic, oil fund, for less than 5 billion, which was made by some of the same, interests that today dominate the board of the new of this new entity. So they will not be different. What we need is a fundamental change in the model of governance of state-owned entities, but also a fundamental shift in the economic policy. And we want the economy that can work in the interest of the working class people, and that cannot happen, by the way, under capitalism, and that I think requires the workers' movement to mobilize, but also to take power in this country.
Right. All right, Mametlwe Sebei. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. A very interesting NPC that has been formed here, hopefully for the benefit, like you say, of the working class of South Africa, given the exorbitant prices of petroleum in this country. Thank you so much for your time. It certainly was insightful. That was General Industries Workers of South Africa President Mametlwe Sebei speaking to us there about the newly formed South African National Petroleum Company.